I think we're all good to go, and I will reserve some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have some questions that pop up, feel free to either pop them into the chat or make a note on the side. And that said, welcome to the biggest secrets of flow, reversing ADHD, and ending time-wasting self-sabotage, and more. So why are we here? I think we all know I'm not going to spend much time on these, but I am going to spend maybe 5-ish minutes on some context. What we'll do in this is we'll have a bit of talking and then the experience and then a bit of talking after that, which will lead to next steps in the Q&A. Now, these are all the things that flow states can do. So we all know that based on being here. But why should you care about this right now? Well, the world is going exponential. We are in an era where there are a million tech things, million platforms, millions of people, millions of things to pay attention to, and that stretches us thin. It makes us disconnected from ourselves, from our purpose, from our community. We have a mental health crisis, and some of it is fueled by the way society is and what we encourage and what we find acceptable in society. And when we have poor mental health, we also have poor physical health. Focus and flow have never been more rare than in these times. Not only that, they've never been more valued. Look at these teenagers. This photo was taken from Flickr, and it's from 2018. Everyone has a smartphone and nobody is talking to each other. Imagine a child having to go to a job interview and having their phone near them and being distracted because an Instagram notification pops up. This is the world we're living in. The new world, modern world, means there are new problems to deal with and adapt to. Now, one of the executives at Facebook says he feels tremendous guilt because of short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops he's saying have destroyed how society works. And this isn't just Facebook, it's all the technologies, and it isn't just social media. It's every advertising thing ever, because people are tapping into neuroscience now to market to people. So more than ever, we need to be aware of how our brain works, not getting hooked, and managing our mental health. You've seen it, I've seen it, we feel it, we know it. The last 30 years have had more changes than the last 100 put together. The last 100, to put it all in context, have seen more changes than the 100 before. The last 1,000 more than the 10,000 before. And both fortunately and unfortunately, our biology is not able to change at that pace. So we're now in the era where AI is becoming mainstream. VR is starting to become a thing. Quantum computing is in research, and connected technologies are popping up more and more. With all these things, there are so many learning curves. One of the biggest skills that we can have, I'm not going to say it's flow, it's adaptability. And our adaptability is driven by how fast we learn and how well we can react to change. And so this isn't just a preparation for the future, it's a public safety announcement about the fast world, your brain and your physical health being at risk with all of this chaos and overwhelm. So that's the context. Why me? Why not anyone else? Well, I'd say I've been rewiring my brain since 2017. I've been doing it for long before then, but I've been doing it consciously and intentionally since 2017. The old me in high school was a top of the class procrastinator. I would do the homework for every single class during the class before it was due. I was distracted and inattentive if the things had no appeal, multitasking. I was unaware of anything to do with trauma, brain development, or flow, productivity, and all of that. I had destructive habits. This is the stuff that was messing up my health. I was staying up all night playing poker or computer games when I was a teenager, most likely looking for connection, looking for risk, looking for dopamine. I was succumbing to peer pressure. In high school, I messed up on my 18th birthday, did the worst party, messed up the house. My parents still put me ashamed about it. In university and beyond, until my mid-20s, I was smoking, drinking, using illicit substances, going to festivals to escape reality. This is my fat self when I was about 16, 17 with my grandma in Tunisia. This is my, I don't know what's going on, not really motivated self, maybe 14. This is my 20s-ish self being whatever I'm trying to display there. And the new me is completely different to that, but has integrated those parts as, yeah, there were good reasons behind those things, but now I can make sense of them. So I no longer procrastinate. That's kind of surface level symptoms at all. I still have some ADHD symptoms, and actually I've not been diagnosed. I have a certain imposter syndrome around ADHD because of that, and I'm still looking into that diagnosis possibly when I come back to France. But I know from my observations and from my theories, I'm able to now focus when it's important. That's not a problem. What is true in my story is I was diagnosed with bipolar, partly as a result of those festivals, partly as a result of that unprocessed trauma. I was hospitalized twice in 2017, 1 week, in 2019 for a full month. That's when I lost a job, I lost a relationship, COVID started, and then I ended up wasting 8, 9 months of my life. But I got really deep into spirituality. And now, since then, I have been symptom-free for 3.5 years. And in the beginning, maybe it was medication, but somewhere along the way, I discovered flow states and I realized I'm understanding how my brain works now. I've reduced my medication on my own accord. I haven't told the doctor by 80% and I'm thriving. I only take that little medication as insurance policy. I'm aware of this stuff and I don't have any more destructive habits. I'll drink 1 drink of alcohol every month or two for a celebration. I won't smoke. We'll skip anything else. Occasionally, I'm an emotional eater, but that's another thing. That's another layer that I've uncovered after peeling all these layers. So I have a serious side, which is all peak performance, corporate productivity, and I have the hippie side, free flowing, and I've managed to integrate these two into the purposeful life that is really fueling my own natural medication. So I'm not sharing this to brag, but I'm sharing this because I say what I do what I say. I've experienced my rewiring of my own brain over the last 6, 7 years, and I'm quite confident in the stuff that I'm going to share. And that's why I'm sharing this with you. So let's get to it right away. That's enough context. What you will get exactly in this is the biggest secret, which is the map of getting into flow states right from the next slides and more details throughout the presentation. The experiential part will alter your brain chemistry and then we'll unpack the neuroscience of what's going on behind the scene. And because I like to over-deliver, I'm also gonna add the 10 big blockers to flow. Some of you might already have this. I will add also the flow triggers list, and I will also add the recovery list. And with all these things, it'll make much more sense once we've seen the map to getting into flow states. So this is it. This is the biggest secret right here. This is the basic, not so detailed version. Whoops. So these states are different states of consciousness. Struggle is a state of consciousness, and flow is a state of consciousness, in much the same way as being asleep and being awake are different states of consciousness. Does that make sense? So in each of these different states, there are different brainwaves going on, and there's different neurochemistry going on. And we'll unpack that. So what's the benefit of knowing? Well, if we don't know this stuff, we end up in this negatively self-perpetrating cycles of not flow, distraction, lack of focus, wasting time, having bad mental recovery, and low energy. So more likely for self-sabotage. My goal here is not just to teach the secrets, not just to give the bonuses, but it's also for teaching how much of a multi-tool and meta skill flow is, because it's so comprehensive. So the flip side of that cycle is the positive self-reinforcing cycle of more flow, more time, better mental recovery, more energy, and more focus. And the idea is using flow to reverse the negative and self-sabotaging cycles. I marketed some of this as reversing ADHD, and I'll provide a few minutes of context behind that. I'm not going to go into depth about the language of reversing. There is no cure to ADHD, but also it's such a vaguely defined thing. If I said, does anyone struggle with discipline, focus, and distractibility? Pretty much that applies to the whole world. So to what extent is it personality, and to what extent is it brain disorder? There's a lot of gray stuff there. And language is a question of mindset and beliefs. Mindset and beliefs are changeable through coaching and therapy. The brain structure and function is also changeable through neuroplasticity, even as an adult. And finally, the expression of our genes and genetics and heredity depends on our lifestyle, environment, and habits. That's the new field of epigenetics. It's way beyond the scope to go into all of these, but my point is, if you combine good education, coaching, therapy, good habits with belief in neuroplasticity and epigenetics, I don't see why it's not possible to actually rewire your brain and cure yourself of something you may or may not have had, because it may or may not have been a disease. So that's my point. The medication for managing ADHD shows up in the flow cycle, and I will show that to you as we unpack it. It's poor education that we don't know this neuroscience, but also there's an adoption curve. The person who had the first TV ever, it wasn't mainstream. It becomes mainstream more and more as time goes on. The science of flow has only been around since the 1970s. And so the time for it to catch up to schools is going to lag for a bit. We do know that making lifestyle changes reduces symptoms. Little disclaimer, because it would be unethical not to. I'm not a doctor, not a medical professional. This is an educational presentation. I cannot guarantee any validities, and please do your own research for anything that is important and seek medical advice where appropriate and relevant to you. I am not a trained teacher. I am not a neuroscientist. I have an engineering degree, and that's it. I am not a trained or licensed therapist. I'm not even a coach. I haven't completed a coach credential. I'm just a phony. But I'm a phony that can get some client results, and I have started reversing some cycles for people, and even some that were beyond what my credential capability would seem to be. And so that said, here's where ADHD and flow intersect. The medication for ADHD is typically amphetamines or methylphenidate stimulants. And the way that they work are by it doesn't take a genius to see a pattern. The difference between amphetamines and methylphenidates is amphetamines put more into your system. Methylphenidates block the reabsorption so that there's more floating around of what's already there. But flow helps you understand and trigger these same neurochemicals naturally. And so here they are. In the struggle phase, you have norepinephrine, which is also called noradrenaline. It's similar to adrenaline, and struggle is kind of like fight or flight. In the flow state, you have dopamine. You also have more, and we'll unpack what the rest of them look like. But my point is, when we know this stuff, we know how to manage our focus, and my theory is to be able to better manage ADHD, maybe even to the point of reversing it. But it doesn't do any good to only know theory, so we'll get to the experiential understanding to really make things stick. According to Stephen Kotler, peak performance is nothing more than getting your biology to work for you rather than against you. He's the guy under which I did my training at the Flow Research Collective, by the way. So what I'm proposing is whenever there's consideration regarding ADHD or not, even just focus, start with learning the stuff from Flow and then see what's necessary after you have made the basic lifestyle interventions. So what's the difference between struggle and flow? Couple of questions to reflect. For struggle, think of something that was your least favorite subject at school. Put yourself back into that situation and really connect with that. What's the worst conversation topic for you to have to pay attention to? These are examples of the struggle states. You're actively paying attention. It takes a lot of resource. It's a bit of a struggle. And for the flow states, what activity most easily brings you effortless joy? What activities can hours pass by and feel like minutes? Laurie, great question on the freeze state. That's definitely, I'll speak to that for a tiny bit. Best accessed during therapy and healing to heal stuff from when you're in a frozen state, but also with mindfulness and embodiment, we can actually become conscious of noticing when we are reacting in a freeze state, and we can do some conscious stuff like little baby steps of moving out of it in order to heal. But yeah, I would say I'm not an expert on that particular topic specifically because I'm not a trained therapist. I do know that there are many ways of healing, and so I would look into those options. So that covers the struggle and the flow state. We'll talk about release and recovery shortly within the after the experiential parts. But those are kind of the extremes. So if struggle is that difficult learning curve and flow is that effortlessness, then we have a consciousness competence model whereby we go from unaware that things are skills at the bottom of the pyramid, called unconscious incompetence, unaware and we're not good at it, to unconscious competence, where we're good at something and we don't even know how, or we're not even aware of being good at it. And in between is that conscious growth of skill. It's a mix of struggle and flow because every task depends on a different skill mix. And I'll illustrate that with an example here. But the point is, over time, you can train yourself to go from experiencing more struggle states to more flow states. And it's about embracing the learning curve of growth, because life is a balance. You can't be born into being in flow with all activities. There are learning curves, and it takes that growth to be able to do it. So the example is a baby. Think of a baby learning how to walk. At first, they're unaware that this is a skill, but they look to their parents and they say, I want to do that. And so they just try. They don't care about judgment. They just keep going. So they go from unaware that this is a skill to they become aware and they suck, and then they become aware and they're good at it. And then as an adult, or even, a very small child, you become good at walking and you're not aware that it's a skill anymore because you've already integrated that competence into your consciousness. And I'm not saying walking is flow, but when something becomes a habit, if it's a mix of a habit and something that you are working on and passionate, and there's lots of different things that trigger flow in different ways, you're able to train yourself. And flow is the same way. Flow is just an umbrella packed with lots of different skills, covering mindset, belief, productivity, neuroscience, goal setting. All those things are skills, and all those things are trainable. So when we know that we can train ourselves and we can go through that learning curve, we then experience more flow and start reversing those cycles. And so, before we get to the fun experiential parts in a minute, little summary of what we've seen so far. The struggle and flow are different states of consciousness that we go in and out of throughout the day. We have to go through the struggle to get through the learning curve in order to build the skills that will lead to flow. And we know there's a flow cycle, which is this diagram right here, to go from one to the next. And we're going to get an experience of that. That was the first secret to flow. But as a bonus, the second secret to flow is that once we learn how to hack flow, thanks to these maps and these models, it actually makes the struggle easier. Because number one, you learn faster. Number two, flow is on the back end. And so you have an intrinsic reward that is motivating you to go through the difficult growth curve. And you can size how much of that growth curve you want to go through in a day, in a week, or in a month. And so you can train yourself to find that perfectly balanced sweet spot. And hacking flow trains your perseverance. It makes you struggle better. We have Carter here with us. We also have Francesca. We have Gabriella. We have John and Jess. And we have Kate. We have Ria. And we have Tom. And we also have all of the other beings that might catch this at a later date, who are all here with us in spirit and sharing this experience, not in the same moment, but at some point later down the line. So with no further ado, we're going to get into the experiential part. Now, I'll speak to each of these things for a bit, and if anyone has any questions, we'll just please pop them in the chat. Whoop. I'm just gonna pop out of my full screen. So vigorous movements means whatever movement you want to do. It could be push-ups, jumping jacks, shaking, just like this. It could be whatever. It could be squats, or just brisk walk, whatever it may be. We'll do about 45 seconds of that. And then we'll do wall staring. Wall staring is literally what it sounds like. You take your eyes off the screen and you just look at a fixed point on the wall. We'll then do a breathwork exercise. In that breathwork, we'll take 2 minutes. And the framework of the breathwork will be breathing in and out and then holding 10 and 10, 20, 20, 30, 30. Now, an important point about this, apologies. It's breathwork itself has so many variables, like how fast you breathe, whether you breathe through your nose or your mouth, how deeply you breathe. All of these factors influence what happens. And to be honest, thinking about these factors is too nitty-gritty detailed. What is most important is that you listen to your body. So even though the framework of the exercise says 10 breaths in and out, just consider it 10 seconds of breathing in and out, regardless of if you do 10 breaths or if you do 5 breaths. You'll feel whatever is too much or too fast for you and just adapt. But yeah, we'll have a timer, and it also doesn't really matter if you're not exactly on the timing. What matters is just following the general format, because again, yeah, the exact framework is a guide. It's not your body. You know your body more, and there's no guide in the world that will replace your body. So once that little breath work is done and you hold your breath after exhaling or just releasing some of the air. Doesn't matter if you fully release everything or if there's still some air inside of you. Whatever you do, whatever feels most comfortable. Again, we're not picking at the nitty-gritty, but once that is done, we'll do a deep inhale and hold. And as we go through each, I will mention where we're at. I'll say we're breathing and then hold, and then breathing in again. And then, so I'll say these things as a guide. And then on the back end of that, we'll get back into the room, smelling the scented thing, and watch our state. So that's preparation said. Anyone have any reservations or questions? I've just cool. So I am go with the shaking or movements. Feel free to get out of the camera's view. Feel free to do something uncomfortable, something that pushes you a bit. Get your blood pumping, get your heart rate. All right, we're gonna wind to the wall staring. So whenever, just find a place on the wall and look at that thing. And just focus on that one little thing. Give it your full attention. It is meant to be boring. It's meant to connect you with something that you don't usually do. It's a hard exercise, and it's fair to want to look away. Try to resist that temptation and just really connect with that spot on the wall. So we're going to go into the breath work and just in and out for 10 seconds. And then hold on the exhale. "20 seconds of breathing. And then hold for 20 seconds. If you need to take a little inhale, feel free, as your body needs. Inhale again, 30 seconds, in and out. If you want to dial up the intensity, breathe more frequently, faster. If you want to dial down the intensity, breathe slower. And hold on the exhale. Inhale and hold. And breathe. And now smell your thing, whatever it may be. Feel free to close your eyes. As you slowly come back into the room, take all the time you need. Wow. I don't know about you guys, but I'm high. Woo. Hmm. Does anyone want to share? How do you feel? Yeah, that's fair, Anna. Dizzy on the last deep breath. It's a lot of changes between oxygen and CO2 happening, depending on many factors. And yeah, it is um, powerful because of that. When we get used to how our body works and what different factors affect us in different ways, we can figure out what works best for us in terms of really boosting back. Yeah, really vivid smell from the vanilla extract. Wow, sounds divine. Yeah. Yes. Mm. Yeah, thank you all for sharing that experience. Feel free to keep them coming. If you've got something written, I will get to it. Yeah, nutmeg. Awesome. Wow. Yeah, li life is super simple when we connect with all that is. And the third secret to flow as a bonus, what we've just done is called recovery stacking. And recovery stacking is basically doing a lot of different recoveries in a short period of time. And it basically, if going for a walk would make your brain recover by this much in 5 minutes, then going for a small walk plus a little other exercise plus some breath work plus other stuff would make you recover by this much in that same amount of time. I'm grateful for being able to share it with everyone. So, what has happened? A little bit of what's gone on. This flow cycle of different states of consciousness happens with different brain waves. And these are what they look like. It also has different neurochemicals that get generated in each of those states. And so in struggle, we have cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and norepinephrine, which is similar, well, same as noradrenaline, just a different name. And it's a similar molecule. These are the ADHD ones, but there's also more. And so in that struggle phase, what's happening from a neurochemistry standpoint is these hormones and neurochemicals are increasing our attention and helping us think clearly. They are helping us stay alert and awake. In the release phase, which is exactly what we did, because when you watch this until the point where we do that release, we're in a struggle phase because we're actively pay attention. It's something new. It's something that we're learning. It's something we can't really predict. We're not in flow. There's a lot of quick cuts, lots of images popping. This is the same thing as what happens in movies, the same thing as what happens in social media or advertisements when you see "pa" on the screen. Those quick cuts are meant to keep you in struggle. And so that big release flushes out the stress chemistry and preps the ground for getting us into a flow state. And we experienced a little bit of that beginning. But if we snap ourselves out of it, if we have a flow blocker, or if we have something that takes us back into struggle, we can go straight back to struggle without passing by recovery. And so a lot of self-sabotage, a lot of distractions, one of the reasons for that is spending a lot of time in struggle. And so we're seeking rewards that will just help us escape from that state, maybe because we're tired, maybe because we're whatever it may be. But if we, let's say, do it right, and there's no way to do it right or wrong, this is a general map. There's two caveats to this map. Number one, you can be in any state during any activity, and you can also be in a deep or a shallow state of every state. So you can be in a really deep flow state or a really small micro flow state. So actually what's happening is changes are happening really quickly, and it's not necessarily a cycle that goes, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the point is being aware of the difference between that struggle and that flow, because release and recovery are quite similar, except for the part where sleep is always a recovery, and it's a mandatory recovery because it helps us replenish. But otherwise, it's pretty much just managing struggle, release, and flow. So the neurochemicals in flow, the dopamine gives us that reward and that focus and that motivation. The endorphins increase our pain tolerance, which is one of the reasons that when we're running, we run faster and longer without feeling that pain. Similarly, if you're playing video games for 5 hours, you don't notice the pain of being sitting still that whole time or working. And the anandamide is what makes us feel good. At least it's a part of it. And finally, on the back end of flow, we have the serotonin and oxytocin release. And that's the feel-good aspect to it. It's the replenishing aspect to it. Those are neurochemicals that are released when we have hugs and have orgasms, amongst many things. It's important to note that a lot of these neurochemicals don't just have one function, and a lot of them are brain and body synergies. So my goal here, and especially with this introduction kind of workshop, is to introduce a basic model that is just enough neurochemistry understanding for the everyday. You know, not everyone needs a PhD in neuroscience to survive the 21st century, but I think everybody does need to know the difference between struggle and flow and how to recover and bounce between these states. So this is the full picture of the model that we're sharing today. This is the full picture of the biggest secret to flow. And with that model, you can take it away and start having an awareness of what's happening within you. Okay, now I'm in struggle. With flow, one of the characteristics of flow is that you're not aware that you're in flow when you're in flow most of the time. So often it's just a case of, am I struggling or am I recovering? And it's as simple as that to really navigate between these states. When we see ourselves going into a distraction rabbit hole or self-sabotaging in some way, we can look at it with a new lens of what's my brain chemistry like, and what are the factors that are causing this? So what we've done with recovery stacking is we've really accelerated how fast that stress chemistry was flushed out. to create that altered state. If we had just sat down and meditated for 5 minutes, we would have gotten this much of a boost. But because we did this whole stack of things, we got this much of a boost, and we feel that alertness, we feel ready, we're back ready for absorbing information again. It's like, oh yeah, okay, my brain's powered up. And it's the same thing going from flow back to struggle. When you're able to recover better, then you can actually make the struggle easier, and you can learn faster, and you can go through the growth curve faster. And so you'll have the slides with all the key stuff. What we've delivered here in under an hour, maybe even under 50 minutes so far, there's a bit of an ending still, is all of these things, plus as a bonus for those of you who haven't got access yet, the 10 flow blockers are things that will take you back to struggle when you're in flow. These are things like fixed mindsets that, oh, the self-critic is coming, I can't do this, now I'm back in struggle. Okay. So knowing what these blockers are will help you avoid them as much as possible. The flow triggers are what help you go from struggle and release into a flow state more easily, because they are things that drive dopamine. So once you know what they look like, you can start having an awareness of where are these things, how are these things applicable for me? And finally, that last bonus is the recovery activities, so that you can replenish your brain faster. It's also what not to do. What not to do from a mental recovery perspective is 3 things: social media, TV, alcohol. Those are not good for mental recovery. Now, I say this making a clear difference that mental recovery is not relaxation. So I'm not here to tell you what to do. The difference between mental recovery and relaxation is based on your personal values and preferences and the lifestyle that you want to lead. From a neurochemical reboosting standpoint, I think I touched on this in the last slide, but I'll emphasize it again. The reason that television or social media are not good at recovery is because they're kind of baked in to struggle phase. They're always like things popping up, scenes being cut, things to pay attention to, and they don't really drive deep, focused, dopamine-driven kind of flow states. So that's just something to be aware of. But again, there's no judgment around having a glass of wine or 20, and enjoying a good movie. Just something to be aware of. That said, I mentioned that flow is a meta skill, and I mentioned the umbrella that it covers. I'll say that all of these things, which are themselves umbrellas, are a part of flow. Now, my stuff specifically doesn't really deal with nutrition because it's such a complex topic, and it is so dependent on our unique biology, our lifestyle, etc. The best thing that I could say about nutrition is the same thing that you could Google, how do I have a healthy diet? Okay, well, eat whole foods, vegetables, don't eat fast food. Okay, done. I'm not going to get more specific about nutrition for flow, but anything else, I'm super keen to go deep on. And there's a lot behind belief, mindset, motivation, and purpose in itself that can be unpacked, which will lead to improvements in flow. And everything else is just skills to learn. It's umbrellas of many other little skills like goal setting, and sizing your tasks and planning your day based on dopamine and stuff like that. But the outcome of flow is really multiplying your productivity by a big factor over the long term. It boosts your learning as well as your memory and creativity, boosts your mood, focus, mental health, and in my experience, even physical health, because you realize the connection between your physical health and your mental health and your productivity, and how much of an impact and necessity exercise and movement is. Because our biology did not come from having supermarkets and office jobs. We were hunting and looking for berries, and so it's a really important part of our functioning. And what I posit and what has been my case as my own clients is really reversing mental health issues. I mean, I never really believed that I had bipolar or was bipolar. I still have the label, but it's a lifelong project for me to get it undiagnosed. Maybe getting it re-diagnosed with ADHD instead would make that happen. But even if it doesn't, I'm unattached to it. I know that what I have done over the last 6 years is naturally rewire my brain in such a way that I don't need what I used to need in terms of my self-sabotage and my risky behavior. And part of that is also layering in trauma work and embodiment. And that's a whole other thing that's not flow. And it can be flow. I'd say flow is kind of a conscious mind approach to healing, but conscious mind is not all there is. So that said, that's really the end of this one. Just one more slide after this, but I wanted to quote Cal Newport, author of the book Deep Work, which is a Amazon best book and business bestseller. Deep work so important, we might consider it the superpower of the 21st century for reasons that have to do with what I was saying in the first few slides. We're living in a new world with all this technology. There are so many learning curves that we have to go through. Adaptability really is one of those skills. And in order to be adaptable, we can't stay stuck in these cycles of self-sabotage. And so with that, I just want to conclude with a few words of what's next. I'll first say thank you to everyone who's shared this time and energy with me. I always welcome feedback so that I continuously improve. I want to open it up for questions and take 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever is needed. And I want to invite you if, with a few opportunities, I'm looking to get into corporate training in 2024. I've gotten to a level where I can answer most practical questions to get 80% of the results for anyone that is struggling with this stuff. And I think it's a really big opportunity for a win-win-win. If I can go to corporations and deliver this kind of workshop and then get some kind of arrangements to teach with them, I'm very happy to profit share. So it's a win for you, a win for me, and a win for the company. And I'll also say, as my sales training coach said, a win for the universe. So everybody's happy and the world's a better place. I'm unattached as to whether anyone wants to work with me or not. For me, this is a lifelong journey. Entrepreneurship is personal development. I'm always happy to recommend other trainings. I have referral for the training that I went through, which is a deep going into flow states, 8 weeks for an hour or half an hour every day sort of thing. But it goes, my opinion on it is it is very much targeted at high-level executive managers and leaders and not really the everyday person. It goes very much in depth into the neurochemistry and even some of the history of flow and the psychology experiments. And the gap that I'm filling is to find that sweet spot between no knowledge of the neuroscience of flow and too much knowledge about stuff that doesn't really make that much of a difference, and really find that midpoint of what's just enough neuroscience and flow to give 80% of the results in the fastest amount of time and the least amount of energy. And a big part of that is the contents that I've shared in this presentation. So come into my world, the invitation is there. Referrals, whether it be to companies or to other people, always appreciated. And with that, I would like to, ask you to share what you thought of the workshop. And I can unmute everyone if you don't have control of it. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm looking at your map or your flow chart, and so struggle, release, flow, and recovery. The exercises we did, what was, I understand maybe while we were doing physical exercise, jumping jacks, that was to induce struggle, right?
So
But I'm trying to understand the exercise we did and how they relate to this flow chart.
yeah, it's a great question. Recovery. So these states are driven by many characteristics. And I'll give a few examples. So if you are in a working mode and just typing on a computer, like say you're writing a book, you might be in struggle. The parts of your brain involved in that particular task are specific to the task of writing a book. And if you do something that is away from the screen, then you're disconnecting from that struggle and going to something else. So there's an aspect of just moving away from the screen which changes your physiology. There is also an aspect of physical movements versus not having physical movements that helps shift that state. So I'll say on a high level, the whole part before the experiential exercise was we were all in struggle state because this is new material to digest. But then even learning what the outline was for the exercise could have been struggle. And even trying to think, okay, am I doing the exercise right? Is the timer what's, even those parts can be little bits of struggle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
But
I'm just
overall, overall, the fact of doing some movements, some breath work, and some sensory experience, that provides a release from what we were just doing in terms of the learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So another question.
Yeah.
The smelling part, was that to exemplify how much more intensely we experienced that after we did the other exercises?
It's a mix, to be honest. It wasn't designed for that. We could have started the recovery or the release with the smelling and then moved into exercise. To be honest, any of those parts could have been shifted in any way. We could have started with breath work, then smell, then done exercise, and got a similar effect. I find it's a cool combination to do breath work and then smell, because I find that that with breath work specifically being the only way we have conscious control over our autonomic nervous system, that has some effects that wouldn't otherwise happen in a normal state of consciousness, in beta brainwave struggle state. Does that
Okay.
answer your question?
Yeah. So that's what you call recovery stacking, where you
Yeah.
do different things to help your mind focus on what you want to focus. And
Yeah, it's one of those techniques. And I forgot to answer the other part of your question, which was, so I answered that it was not necessarily designed to get the heightened experience. I will say that it was designed to provide a different experience. And by stacking a different experience, we actually heighten that effect. Because if you just go for a walk, right? If let's say you're writing a book and then you go for a walk, on your mind, you're going to be thinking about the book that you've just been writing. Whereas if you take a cold shower and then smell some roses, that book is going to be way long gone in your past, because you've experienced all these sensations really quickly. And that makes the faster shift than just going for a walk in the woods. Does that make sense about the smelling?
yeah, so it's basically they're little tricks to allow your brain to relax or to disconnect, or not disconnect, but to recover from what it was being used for, which is kind of intense. The struggle is an intense process for the brain. I'm asking
Exactly.
this, I apologize if I'm taking too much time, but I'm
No.
really interested in this, in what you did, because I do a version of this whenever I work with people and visual art. I ask people to do a series of different things that disrupts their normal way of being. And that allows them to open up to intuition and to creativity. So yeah, thank you for explaining that. Makes perfect sense now.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah, and that's exactly it. I'll say, for example, I use the example of writing a book and then taking a walk in the forest. In this case, writing the book is what I used as the example for the struggle state. But as a counterexample, we can say that if I'm learning snowboarding,
Yeah.
I might be in a struggle state as I learn to navigate the moves and make the mind and body connected. And actually, I'll be in a much more recharged state after that exercise to do computer work, which is counterintuitive. So you'd actually be more likely to come into a flow state unless it's more struggle. But the thing is, that kind of struggle would be different, right? The struggle of learning snowboarding versus the struggle of the computer work would be different, and so much more tolerable. Hence why that physical exercise is included as one of the recovery release activities.
I think this is a good example of the fact that our minds require variety to stay healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
Thank you.
think so. Lee has popped off of the meeting, so I'll answer Lee's question after catching up with Lee. Anyone else have anything to share or say or ask?
Yeah, I guess about the recovery phase activities, I had a question.
Yeah.
So they would be like doing something different than what you were doing, but not like passive, like TV watching or computer games or something like that, or social media.
Yeah, correct. So
Would
there
they be
are, yeah,
would they be different depending on the type of activity you were trying to be in the flow state with?
there's a lot of factors to it. There are some activities that will naturally tend to put you in flow more often than others. And that's based on your unique motivations and how you feel about those activities intrinsically. Sorry, I couldn't tell if there was, yeah, if you were speaking there. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you can kind of, based on this map, you can kind of plan your day in certain ways when you know that certain activities are more likely to put you in a flow state versus other activities are much more likely to be frustrating learning curves. Does that make sense? And from that basic planning, like reading a neuroscience textbook in the morning and then having my lunch and then writing, I'm much more likely to be in a deeper flow state than if I do things in a different way. I don't know if that made sense or answered your question. I think looking at the flow triggers list will also help for that because flow triggers by themselves drive dopamine, and there are things that can be done to heighten the chances of getting into flow, even for things that do involve learning curves. Flow in itself, although it is an effortless kind of state, there is a certain amount of challenge that is required to get into flow, because if that challenge is not met, then the task is too boring and therefore not enough engaging for the brain. And on the flip side, there's also an area where a task can be too overwhelming and too frustrating. So that whole spectrum is called the challenge to skill balance. And that's a flow trigger. When you get the task just right, that it's just the right size and just the right deadline, then you can heighten your chances of getting into flow.
Yeah, I worked with Anthony for a few months, and it did help a lot. This, I called it interrupting the routine, which going out for a walk or doing a completely different activity from what I wanted to focus on really helped a lot. What I sometimes have trouble with is I tend to make everything routine. So if I start doing activities that are different from what I usually do, then I continue doing them, and then they become the routine. So for me, introducing variety seems to be the trick where I break the routine all the time. So
Yeah.
that is a question that I wanted to ask you, is how do you avoid routining, your breaking of routine.
Wait, I feel like that's a meta question. Can you repeat that again?
Yeah,
How do you routine breaking routines?
Yeah,
I,
no,
you
the
know,
opposite.
Yeah.
Avoid taking it and making
yeah.
it a routine. Yeah.
Well, what comes to mind? So, first of all, the breaking of routine means introducing novelty, right? It means something
Yeah.
new. Novelty is a flow trigger. It's in that list of individual flow triggers, and therefore, our mind is automatically in a mode where it pays a bit more attention to it. I would say it's a mix of motivation and life experience stuff because breaking routines, right, can be going out of your comfort zone in a struggle way. It can also mean achieving things on the bucket list. I actually have a weekly reminder in my calendar of all the life experiences that I want to have. It includes things like skydiving and going to Burning Man and all these different things. And I mean, you can introduce the bucket list items on a yearly, 6 monthly, monthly, weekly sort of routine. You can also use recovery as an excuse to do these novel things, like maybe going to the spa, right? Or going to a hot spring would be a fantastic way to mentally reboot, a difficult month or a difficult couple of weeks. And that at the same time adds novelty to a routine. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is like near and dear to my own heart. How do you habitualizing disruption? And for me in my line of work, it's a combination of this like flow and presence thing, which sometimes they can mean the same thing, but sometimes they're totally different. But my answer to that and what I use to like heighten my flow states, but also like not make my flow states become the baseline is really just having a mindset or a meditative practice that is like a mental dump or an energetic release. Like that's kind of the maintenance piece to the not habitualizing the disruption, right? Because anything that can be great, like flow, you naturally want to repeat, but in the repetitiveness, it can become dull and it can become habitualized, which I think is what you were alluding to, right? And like if I go for a run, the first week it's disruptive, but the second week it's already habit. And now it's not disrupting anything because now it's the new habit that I have to disrupt, right?
Exactly.
So I think
see.
it goes back to where within this paradigm of flow structure, I think it's included in those, what did you call them? Like they're the more like personalized motivational thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it would be a meditation practice or a mindset practice or an energy practice in which that rebooting happens, right? So we're not, like in flow, we're getting into a peak state, but those peak states require sort of rebooting so that we can get into a new peak state over and over and over again. So whatever I don't know how you would define that within your world, Anthony, but like whatever that rebooting process is I think the thing that Anna's looking for.
Yeah. So
right. Because artists have to do that all the time. To be a really good artist, you have to practice the same thing over and over again. And
Mhm.
after a while, it becomes boring. You know, you get really good at it and you make some really good shit out of it, but then after a while, you're bored with it. So you have to invent another technique to
Yeah.
learn or try a new medium or something. Um, yeah, that's I think that's probably a problem that most creative people or well, everybody's creative, but people who actually actively live a creative life is that play of routine and novelty,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Um,
Because
yeah.
yeah, a lot of that novel experience triggers our creativity. And so there's 2 points that I want to speak to. Our brain can be in a very focused state or in a very creative state. But it can't really switch between both like this, like in 2 minutes, right? It's not going to go back and forth. Or if it does, it's quite inefficient. So there's one piece which is being really clear based on our habits of what is my focus task and what task will require my active paying attention versus time for either nothing or specifically like letting the mind wander tasks. And so one of the concepts in flow is separating strategy from execution. The idea here is when you're setting goals, let's say I have to write a book. The goal is writing a book. Okay. I break that goal down into lots of milestones, and I break those milestones down into how I'm actually like what I'm actually going to write about, the outline, and all of that. That piece about breaking down the goals and writing the outline is more creative mind stuff because you're connecting different concepts from different chapters. When you're writing the book, it's more execution. It's I'm following, okay, I'm going to write about this, this, done. And it's a similar thing that you can do if you separate out whatever tasks require focus and kind of just struggle zone to taking time for meditation, taking time for walks, and taking your mind off of the focus problem. You let your mind get into that creative state of how to solve those problems in different ways. And so we're constantly bouncing back and forth between these states. So that's one concept, is that separation of strategy versus execution.
You know, this is really interesting because so you're talking about how to conquer the ADHD mind, which is, you know, I've never been diagnosed either, but I know I am. Or my mind works that way. What's funny about this process is that you're almost treating the problem with its own medicine, meaning it's homeopathic.
100%. Yeah.
Homeopathic. You are almost distracting your brain on purpose so that it can focus better on what you really want to focus on. This is
Yeah,
brilliant.
it's the same irony as inattentiveness and hyperactivity being treated by stimulants. You know, whereas someone would get really high, another person might feel normal. You know, like, I needed this boost to just focus and operate. The disconnect is that the general population don't have this awareness and understanding.
Yeah, yeah.
There was one more thing that I wanted to speak to around that creativity and pattern disruption, and that was the different scales of recovery. So what we went through in the experiential exercise is what I would call a micro recovery. And it's the recovery that happens in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. We have daily recovery, which might be, you know, your shower is an example of a recovery. Because whatever you're doing before the shower, whatever you're doing after is not the shower, but getting into that shower is just a time of recovery from whatever you were doing before. So that's an example of daily recovery. But at the same time, you can have weekly and monthly recoveries that span on wider scales, and you might have activities that are more, that recover you more than what you need on the day-to-day, right? So you might, on a week-by-week basis or once a month, you might take a full day off to just go explore the Grand Canyon or just go into the forest, you know, and don't do anything, no work, just a full day of mental recovery. And then extrapolating that even further, ensuring that you're not the kind of person who works 24/7 and gets burned out, taking a week or two off in a year, you know, taking a 3-day weekend every 6 months or every 3 months, right, is part of that quarterly, half annual, annual recovery range. And so we can use that recovery range of between weekly and annual as not only things that are bucket list items, but they're also brain resets, and they are moments where we can really add our creativity into the mix because they add that diversity and breaking the routines.
So, so the answer in flow state terminology would be the reboot part is whatever your largest or bigger expressions of recovery are. You use the bigger recoveries as reboot.
Yeah.
Right. Because if I went and jumped out of a plane, after that, my habitual walks would seem new.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, how frequently do you jump off a plane?
Well, yeah, I haven't and I don't want to.
But
But
yeah.
like but yeah, so the answer on a flow state, I just put things in
Yeah.
like languages. So the answer in flow
Correct.
state language is your tendency to keep things from getting stagnant and habitual is your bucket list recovery way, right? Is the bigger
Yeah.
recovery way that so it's like you reboot the small novelties by adding big novelties.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Okay.
But I don't remember who said it, but that saying, you know, do something that scares you every day, falls in that category. That is the big reboot, is when you do something that you really are a little afraid to do, and you've never done it before, and you do it anyway. It totally resets your brain. It's amazing. You do it on the first day of the year. I'm going to do something I've never done before.
Fantastic. Do you know what it's going to be yet?
Yes, it's an improv thing.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
It's an improv expression workshop. I've never done, well, no, I have done theater, but I've never done anything improvisational, with the exception of drawing or painting, you know, but something completely out of my comfort zone. It'll be really interesting.
Thanks for sharing, Anna. Excited for you.
Thank you.
Anyone have anything else? Otherwise, I'm gonna wind it down.
I do have a question. What would, let's say, a 3-month or a 6-month program working with you look like in terms of scheduling and goals to achieve?
So I've just put together a signature program, which I'm very happy with. It's a 12-week program, and it goes through all of these things and really integrating them piece by piece. I've got a document that outlines that. What other questions do you have? We can maybe schedule something for outside of that. There'll be some big launch happening in January. I think at some point between the end of week 1 and week 3. There will be another, well, I'll be repeating this workshop at the end of January within another community as a collaboration with another coach. And I'm gonna keep doing these workshops once a month. I will also probably be doing other workshops at the midpoints between the start of the month and the end of the month. So I'll be, yeah, I'm systemizing things. So you'll find out what's happening. Yeah, but the invitation is to chat about that one-to-one if you're interested, and yeah, we can answer all the questions. Is there anything else? Thank you all for your time, energy, and attention, presence. Lots of love. Take some time to sleep and integrate. It will all compound. To be honest, it's taken me a couple of years to really understand the flow cycle. I had the biggest imposter syndrome and so many questions around it. The best of understandings will be experiential. It's going to be identifying, okay, am I in this struggle state? Am I, getting to the point of frustration is a good thing. Getting to the point of self-sabotage, not so much. So that's a sign that it's time for a little recovery of some sort, and maybe some awareness of what is it that this moment is teaching me about that self-sabotage? What is the lesson that I can learn from this moment? And actually doing that recovery will take you in a different state where you might either not self-sabotage so much or be able to actually stop it for that moment and focus on something else. But it's a complex thing. Yeah, the mind is really complex and really well built. So to explain it in a 4-part cycle is a bit of a simple model, but it's quite useful. Yeah, so my recommendation is take that awareness, chew on whatever you can bite, and really take some time to integrate it, and lean into the recovery activities as ways of shifting out from either struggle, frustration state that's a bit too much, or when you notice these productivity sabotage, like distractions or things that aren't so useful. I don't like oversimplifying, because sometimes there are really good things about distractions. So yeah, it's complex to unpack. It's complex.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I always enjoy your mind and your energy and your knowledge. I'm gonna
Thank
go.
you.
Great to see you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful evening, and Happy New Year if I don't see you or chat with you before then. Enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. Happy New Year to you too.
Bye. Happy New Year to everybody.
Beautiful.